You came to Grammar Granny's last session. Good for you. But take heart, my dears, we're almost through with noun clauses. There's just one type of noun clause left, the gerund. These are one of the last complex forms to appear in kids' speech. Often they don't use them until school age. To understand gerunds, you need to remember that we talked about two kinds of participles verbs can have. There's past participles that go along with the auxiliaries in the have family, have, has, and had, and that end in en or ed. Things like have been driven, have spoken, have eaten, have helped, have tried, have wanted. And then there are the present participles. These go with be auxiliaries in active sentences and end in ing, like am driving, are speaking, is eating, was helping, were trying. Well, my dears, like so many other things in English that we've looked at, these present participle ing forms also have another use, as gerunds. Gerunds use the present participle ing form of the verb, but they act like nouns. That's why we say they're one of the types of noun clauses. And because they act like nouns, gerund clauses can fill all the same slots in the sentence that other noun phrases or clauses can. So they can be a subject in a sentence like wearing short sleeves supports our right to bear arms, or a direct object in a sentence like I stopped fighting my inner demons because we're on the same side now. They can be an indirect object. We owe our championship to winning this game. And they can be a predicate nominative, as in happiness is having a large loving family in another city. Finally, they can be the object of a prepositional phrase, as in I get plenty of exercise by pushing my luck. Can you make up two sentences that have gerund clauses in them? Stop the video for a minute and try. If you got something like splitting an infinitive is a grammar boo-boo, or my granddaughter is great at driving her parents crazy, then have a cookie. You're a noun clause expert. Another type of clause that acts as a different part of the sentence is the adjective clause. These follow nouns or pronouns, and just like adjectives, they modify or add more information to their neighboring nouns and pronouns. These kinds of dependent clauses that act like adjectives are called relative clauses, or sometimes adjectival clauses. They usually start with a relative pronoun that acts as a conjunction, like that, which, who, whose, or whom. But sometimes they don't have any conjunction at all. Stop the video and see if you can find the relative clauses in these sentences. Those who throw dirt only lose ground. I poured spot remover on my dog, who is now gone. Women that are well behaved rarely make history. He has a clear conscience, which is usually the sign of a bad memory. These are the lame jokes I warned you about. If you said, those who throw dirt only lose ground, I poured spot remover on my dog, who is now gone. Women that are well behaved rarely make history. He has a clear conscience, which is usually the sign of a bad memory. Great job! All these relative clauses tell more about the noun or pronoun in italics that they modify, and they have a relative pronoun that serves as a conjunction, connecting them to the matrix sentence. You can see, too, that they can come either in the middle of the sentence, where they're called center-embedded relatives, or at the end of the sentence, where they're called right-branching relatives. Right-branching relatives at the end of the sentence usually appear earlier in children's speech and are easier for them to learn first when they're just starting relative clause therapy. But did you find the relative clause in the last sentence? These are the lame jokes I warned you about. This one was harder because there was no relative pronoun, but you can see that it has its own subject, I, and the main verb, warned. So it is a clause, and it is modifying the noun jokes, so it qualifies as a relative clause. Take a minute and try to come up with 3 sentences of your own that have relative clauses. If you got some like these, a holy cow is one that fell into a hole. Parents whose children are the noisiest take the kids to the mall. A math teacher is someone who helps you solve problems that you'd never have without her. Then have a cookie. You're relatively great at this. And did you get any like my last one that had a relative clause that you'd never have without her, that modifies the last noun of the relative clause before it, who helps you solve problems? Then you are a star. Adverbial clauses are clauses that act like adverbs. They modify verbs or adjectives and provide information about time, place, manner, condition, and reason. Another way to say this is that they give information about time, place, manner, condition, and reason, answer the questions when, where, how, and why, and some examples are after, as long as soon as, before, since, until, when, whenever, while, where, wherever, if, as though, provided that, unless, because, since, in order that, so, and so that. These are some of the earlier subordinate clause types that kiddos learn, and they should be part of the first set we teach school-age kids when their language has not progressed into complex development. Can you find the adverbial clause in this sentence? Where there's a will, there are 500 relatives. If you said where there's a will, because it has its own main verb is, or apostrophe s, it provides information about place to modify the verb, and uses the subordinating conjunction where, have a cookie. You've got it. Now stop the video again and try to match each of these adverbial clause sentences to the kind of information it adds. Then find the adverbial clause. Did you get time goes with when everything's coming your way, you're in the wrong lane? Place goes with we live in a town where pizza gets to your house before the police? Manner goes with 3 out of 4 people act as though they made up 75% of the population. Condition goes with if you can't see the bright side of life, polish the dull side. And reason goes with I would never die for my beliefs because I might be wrong. Then good for you. You're one of the Grammar Granny greats. Just one more type of subordinate clause for now, my dears. Comparative clauses. They're called comparative because they compare information in the independent clause to something in the dependent clause. They're pretty easy to spot because they almost always begin with than or as. Here's a few examples. Grammar Granny has had as many birthdays as Apple has iPhones. Grammar Granny has had more birthdays than Asha has had conventions. See if you can come up with a few comparative clause sentences on your own. Great job, my dears. Let's just quickly review all the complex sentence types we talked about as we look at the general order in which kids learn them. From ages 2.5 to 3, kids start using catenatives, like I want to go home now. From 3 to 3.5, they used conjoined sentences with 2 coordinate clauses, like open the door and turn on the lights. From 3.5 to 4, they begin to use sentences with more than one subordinate clause or both subordinate and conjoined clauses within the same sentence, such as he wants to stay home and I don't know why, and I think we need to pour water on it. From 4 to 5, we get the more advanced complex types, including infinitive clauses with non-coreferential subjects, like I want it to go chug chug, WH infinitives, like I know what to do, relative clauses, like these aren't the kind that I like, gerund clauses, like I feel like turning it, and unmarked infinitives, like help me pick these up. Wow, you sure learned a lot about complex sentences. You should be very proud of yourselves. Now Grammar Granny is almost through. You know almost everything she knows. Just one more little topic we need to tackle. We've talked about all the types of complex sentences we'll want to assess in kids' language and provide models and practice with as we work with school-age kiddos. Before we call it quits, Grammar Granny just wants to make sure you know all you need about the other part of complex sentences, conjunctions. I promise it won't take long. First, as you probably know, conjunctions can be made up of one word or more than one. Simple conjunctions have just one word, like and, but, or, so, when, where, although, unless, and whether. As you can see on slide 21, there are also compound conjunctions made up of two words, like nevertheless, therefore, thereafter, wherever, however, and whenever. And there are phrasal conjunctions that include complete phrases, like in other words, that is, even if, as such, and then, so then. Now, just as there are different types of complex sentences, there are also different types of conjunctions, but only four, so don't stress, my dears. There's coordinating conjunctions, conjunctive adverbs, or these are sometimes called adverbial conjuncts, correlative conjunctions, and subordinating conjunctions. Let's tackle them one at a time. Coordinating conjunctions are the ones we've already talked about that join independent clauses. They can also join phrases, so we talked about being careful to notice whether it was clauses or phrases being joined. Can you remember what they are? And then, but, for, nor, or, so then, yet. If you remembered them, have a cookie. Conjunctive adverbs, or sometimes called adverbial conjuncts, are adverbs that connect independent clauses. You can see some examples on my blackboard. As you can see, most of these words are pretty highfalutin, and they wouldn't be used by anybody until secondary school, and even then only to make academic and logical arguments. It's just good for us SLPs to know about them when working with high-functioning students with autism or dyslexia who may need help with this kind of literate language. A good way to work with them is to have clients combine sentences using these conjuncts in a way that the final complex sentence makes sense. For example, which of the conjuncts above could be used to combine these two clauses? Alexander Hamilton was an immigrant to the New Amsterdam colony. He married into one of its oldest families. These two clauses express opposing or discordant ideas. So discordant conjunctions like nevertheless, or however, or even so would make sense here. Alexander Hamilton was an immigrant to the New Amsterdam colony. Nevertheless, he married into one of its oldest families. Now try this one. George Washington was admired by all the soldiers in his army. He was extremely popular as president. Here the ideas in the two clauses are in accord. Therefore, see, I just used one of our conjunctive adverbs. Therefore, we would want a concordant conjunct, such as similarly, additionally, or furthermore. So we might say, George Washington was admired by all the soldiers in his army. Furthermore, he was extremely popular as president. If you work with secondary students, you'll find knowing about these conjunctive adverbs handy. Correlative conjunctions come in pairs. Both and, neither nor, either or, if then, whether or not. And just like love and marriage back in Grandma Granny's day, you can't have one without the other. We can't make a meaningful sentence with just one. You can't say either you pay your fare. And you can't say whether you graduate. So the pair is considered the conjunction in the sentence. Finally, we come back to our old friends, the subordinating conjunctions. We've met lots of them already. Can you name 5 of them? If you said 5 of the ones on my blackboard now, have the whole cake. Good for you. Now, you remember, the Grammar Granny told you I would teach you a quick way to assess kiddos' level of complex language development? Well, here it is, the subordination index. It's the number of clauses divided by the number of T-units or sentences. It's sometimes called a measure of clause density. Take the sentences we looked at before. I would never die for my beliefs because I might be wrong. If you can't see the bright side of life, polish the dull side. We live in a town where pizza gets to your house before the police. When everything's coming your way, you're in the wrong lane. And 3 out of 4 people act as though they made up 75% of the population. We can compute a subordination index on this group of sentences. We do this by first counting the total number of clauses in the sentences. So there are 5 independent clauses because there are 5 sentences and each one of those has to have an independent clause. So the 5 independent clauses are: I would never die for my beliefs, polish the dull side, we live in a town, you're in the wrong lane, 3 out of 4 people act. And then there are the dependent clauses: because I might be wrong, if you can't see the bright side of life, where pizza gets to your house before the police, when everything's coming your way, as though they made up 75% of the population. So we have a total number of 5 sentences and a total of 10 clauses. We would then divide the number of clauses, 10, by the number of sentences, 5, and that gives us 2. 2 is the subordination index for this sample of language. Now 2 is very high. Even typical high school students don't usually score much over 1.6, but it gives you the idea. You can quickly get a sense of how complex a kiddo's language is by just using a subordination index. You'll learn lots more about the details of how to code and how to count these kinds of measures as you go through grad school. But for now, thanks for sticking with Grammar Granny. You're a syntax superstar.